All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. We've got Morgan Thomas, the Morgan Thomas Show, covering all things Clemson Tigers. Man, how you doing, bud? Long time no talk.
Yeah, long time. I'm doing great. I appreciate you having me on. Just got out. I got my Braves shirt on. I just got out of a softball game with my daughter, and so wanted to jump on and talk some college football now.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much for making time for us tonight. If you had to describe the mood amongst the Clemson faithful right now, what word or what phrase would you use to describe it?
I think it's more excited than after the Georgia game. Obviously, with such a an offensive just explosion of the App State game. It's kind of weird because you had that historically great offensive performance, and then you had an off week.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like died down a little bit, but there's anticipation to see if Clemson can continue the success that they had. There's a lot of hope that Clemson can, that Cade Klubnik and the team has figured something out that is going to work not just against Appalachian State, but also against the other teams. So there's cautious optimism, a lot of hope, but also a little bit of anxiety, just wanting to get out there and see if it was a fluke or not.
Yeah. What's so tough is trying to figure out, and the answer's very obviously like probably somewhere in the middle. But what's tough is trying to figure out if the UGA game was more representative of where Clemson is, or if the App State game was more representative of where they are. Now, again, it's very easy to say somewhere in the middle, but like how close to either side is where they are. At the end of the day, though, Cade did look way better in that game, and it's easier to hit guys that are wide open. I get it, but you still have to hit them, right? Like no matter who the opponent is, no matter who the DB is, you still have to hit them. And so, you know, do I know you say cautious optimism, but is it your thought that maybe he has taken a step forward?
Well, I think that I do my passing charts over on X, the Morgan T Show, and I like to do. I've done the passing charts since DJ. Really, is when I kind of started it, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I do feel like when I go back and watch film, Cade's biggest part where he can improve or where he is starting to see more consistency is in his footwork. And a lot of that footwork was negatively impacted by the lack of consistency on the offensive line. They had a younger offensive line coach that, looking back, really probably wasn't ready for that type of role to teach a team cohesively as a unit. I think he probably was extremely smart about maybe teaching individuals, but as a unit as a whole, they didn't seem to really understand what to do or work well together or to react properly in stressful situations. And so now with Matt Luke, you've got somebody who is basically a head coach, as your offensive line coach. So he brings a lot of experience and a lot of confidence and a lot of knowledge in that unit. And that helps kind of bring consistency to the offensive line, which then allows Cade to have the ability to be more consistent with his feet. When Cade has happy feet, you might as well go to the concession stands because it's going to be a terrible drive. You might as well go get a pizza or something like that. If Cade has calm feet and he can set and he can scan and he has that, kind of bounce that it's just a good rhythm, he can be lethal and he can throw right where he needs to throw and he can throw in stride. And he can also kind of start to see the middle of the field. That's not what happened against Georgia. Obviously, their front seven is much more stressful on you, and they're going to bring it. And they are very good at disguising coverages. A lot of times, they would show a cover three, and it'd be a cover one max blitz, or vice versa. So it's very hard to really know what they were going to do till the last minute. So I do feel like that Clemson, that offense has what it needs to be more consistent. They've shown glimpses, and Cade, even during the Georgia game, if you watch the Aaron Murray film, the review on him, you could really kind of see, hey, it's not all doom and gloom as fans thought. I mean, after the Georgia game, it was like basically Dabo Swinney has forgotten how to be a head coach, and this is terrible, and we need to move on. And now after the Appalachian State game, it's okay. Well, maybe it wasn't all doom and gloom. Maybe there is something there that they can build off of. It's just now showing what they can do against, more formidable Power 5, Power 4 opponents.
Yeah, Georgia does that too. A lot of people, right? Like that's certainly not out of their wheelhouse. So
Yeah.
NC State quarterback switch. CJ Bailey this weekend taking over for McCall. Do you is there almost like a fear of the unknown there? Like would it have just been easier to see McCall, or is it a true freshman? So hey, we'd rather not see the 5th year guy, or what are the thoughts around the QB switch and how Clemson will defend?
I have weird thoughts about the QB in general, just because I felt as if Grayson McCall was one of those guys I'd rather have had than DJ back in the DJ era, because Grayson was doing well at Coastal Carolina. One of the most, I think, had one of the highest passing percentages in college football in his tenure there. I mean, he just wasn't missing players. What we're seeing at NC State, and I don't know if this was really true at Coastal, but what we're seeing at NC State is he's really not throwing the ball very far. And it's kind of what Cade had to deal with last year and what DJ had to deal with his first year or even second year with Clemson is, you know, it's great to have a 70% completion percentage, but if you're not throwing it for more than 5 yards, you're not really helping your team
Yeah.
when it comes to being a quarterback. You're just kind of going to those checkdowns or going to those out routes or just those quick slants, and you're not really moving the chains like you should be. And you're definitely not showing the defense that they need to respect you in any way outside of 5 or 6 yards. So Grayson McCall is one where, just a few years ago, I said, hey, let's pick him up. But now looking at him in the past couple of weeks, and I agree with NC State fans on it. I just think, he doesn't seem to be the right fit for the offense that you need in today's college football. He's one of those guys that's just throwing short passes, throwing to the outside. He's not super mobile either. And so he's really not forcing the defense to respect him. And it's just shocking to me because I wasn't expecting that from NC State at all. And probably to add into it, I can't pick on him too much because to add into it, their offensive line has been struggling as well. And that's just really hurt their running game too. So if you have no running game, your offensive line struggling, and your quarterback's not throwing it deep, I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster, which we saw. They're winning. They won the Louisiana Tech game, but we're losing most of the game. And then they brought CJ Bailey in, like you mentioned. And you're right. There is a fear of the unknown because I'd rather have Grayson McCall because you have film on him. You have film on him from many years ago, from multiple seasons, is what I'm trying to say. And CJ Bailey, you don't have that. And he does seem to be a little bit more of a gunslinger. Now he's going to throw a couple of interceptions, which I hope. And I put a what do you call it? I don't know what I haven't named it yet, but I put like hey, I'm looking for you to show out on Khalil Barnes, because Khalil Barnes for Clemson, number 7 on the defense, is a guy who is kind of a ball hawk. He's kind of a guy who can get a lot of defensive turnovers and just really flip the field on you. Same thing goes with Sherrod Koval. I think both of those guys can really take advantage of Bailey's, newness, if you will, and lack of experience, and just um, gunslingerness of
Yeah.
his style. But again, CJ Bailey, he can make big plays, and he obviously opens up the offense more to where you do have to respect a little bit deeper of a passes over the middle. So I think overall it's a good move for NC State. It adds a little different of a challenge for Clemson, but also on the other side, I think it's unfortunate that his next game is against what I feel like is a very veteran and experienced and confident defense. So I don't know if it'll be good for him coming up this weekend.
Yeah, having to go to Death Valley, right? Like probably the toughest game on your schedule as
Mhm.
your first start is
Yeah,
certainly not what any true friend. I mean, but kids love the moment.
yeah,
He would never tell you like, oh man, why'd it have to be Death Valley? But
yeah.
in the back of his mind, I'm sure he's thinking like, this couldn't be Snuggy Hill. Like we couldn't go to Wake for a game one. NC State's defense, maybe box score was a bit misleading in the Tennessee game. I think the defense only gave up 13 points in the first half, and so they were holding Nico down, somewhat. But with some turnovers and pick sixes and fumble recovery, like stuff like that, like it got out of hand quickly and then snowballed in the second half. But do you think Clemson tries to open it up on them a little bit, like Tennessee did? Do you think they look to attack more on the ground to set up the pass, or how do you think Clemson looks to attack that NC State defense, which is shown to be a little bit shaky at times?
Well, I don't think that Clemson spreads their wide receivers out as much as Tennessee does, and Josh Heupel. But I think that, as you mentioned, they can definitely steal from the playbook, steal from the example that was shown. Dylan Sampson, I think, is the running back for Tennessee,
Yeah,
and if you're watching him, as I'm watching him just gash up the North Carolina State defensive line on a lot of draw plays. You know, I don't see a ton of that from Clemson, like draw plays. Maybe that's something that they can start incorporating this weekend. But Sampson was just gashing them, a lot. I think he had 137 yards, 2 touchdowns, something like that. But he had a great game. And if I'm Phil Maffa for Clemson, I'm just thinking, hey, this could be me.
yeah,
I mean, I could have a dominant performance as well. Again, behind the Matt Luke coached offensive line, I think that's what you go for. I think you put it back into your most veteran offensive player, your most skilled offensive player, your NCAA football highest rated player, which is Phil Maffa. I think you give it into his hands and try to gash them running the ball, just like Tennessee did. But again, Tennessee does that because of the threat of Nico.
yeah.
And so it's kind of like the pass is such a threat that the run is easier. And so maybe Clemson has to do that as well. But I still think, I would be disappointed if this is not a 100-yard rushing game from Phil Maffa.
Yeah. Just big picture, Clemson's a 20.5 point favorite the last time I looked at it. We'll see what it is around game time, but nearing or right at 3 touchdowns. Clemson certainly expects to win, playing a true freshman. Kind of a different place from where they were in the offseason, thinking like, man, we got to open up with Georgia, and then NC State's going to be maybe a competitor in the ACC. That's a really tough one. And then we got to go to Tallahassee. It kind of feels like if Clemson kind of finds their footing, they may be able to go and meet Miami in the ACC championship, or it may just feel like a little bit different feel, especially coming off of that week one game against Georgia, where it was pretty down low in the dumps. And so it almost feels like if Clemson can, if they slip up this weekend, I'm sure the meltdown will be massive. But if they take care of business, it really does set them up on a trajectory to maybe have a pretty good year this year.
Well, the slip ups are always possible in college football. You never know. It's not a perfect on paper. What you think is going to happen may not always happen. It's hard for me to say that because I'm looking at the previous games and I feel like NC State is just a very beatable team. They're not really performing very well on offense and on defense. They're just giving up a lot of rushing yards as well. So, and Louisiana Tech just seemed to be able to keep fighting back and keep getting chances to win the game. And I think Clemson will be much better than that. So, but it is NC State, and it is a heated rivalry in the Dave Doran era for Clemson. It's one of those things where he's just developed this hatred for the between the fan bases, I guess, and it's like we don't really want to see NC State do well at all, to the same level of South Carolina, or honestly, Florida State has kind of died off a little bit. Sorry to say, but Florida State's rivalry is kind of taken a back seat to like NC State and South Carolina, because those games have been more competitive recently. So I feel like NC State's definitely a heated rivalry for Clemson, and I think that you know when I think for the Roars Pick'em contest on the radio, we had it at 17. So the fact that it's like 20 and a half, I think you said, is just weird to me. Like I don't want to believe that, because I feel like NC State is a team that's gonna pull out all the stops to make sure that you don't walk away with that type of win.
Yeah.
And Dave Doran is like the perennial 5-win team, or excuse me, 9-win team. Like he always wins 9 games. I don't know, at least 9 games. I don't know how he does it, even in some of his bad teams. So I feel like he's going to figure out how to make himself competitive. Like you mentioned, with the new quarterback, that could be a help for them. So I do feel like it's going to be a tight battle. But I did take Clemson minus the 17. So I just feel like right now the film is showing me that NC State's definitely a team that should be a beatable team by multiple scores in Death Valley for sure. So I don't know, but the old Clemson fan in the back of my mind says, don't believe that. Don't go for the minus 17. Like NC State's going to keep it close. They're going to stress you out. And like last year, they're even going to win the game. Hopefully Cade has learned from that. I think a lot of people asked Cade recently about, what's the thought of like facing a team again that kind of left you with a bitter taste in your mouth last season. And he mentioned just how that's just things that you have to deal with as a competitor. You can't, you have to remind yourself, hey, this is what they did to me last year. And you have to kind of play with, some revenge in your mind, but you also don't want to push yourself too far to where you are trying to be perfect, or trying not to make too many mistakes, or you're playing out of your natural style. You know what I mean? You don't want to put too much stress on yourself, but you definitely want to remember back in your mind, hey, they did beat you last year, and you want to get that revenge.
I'm kind of with you there. I think I like Clemson around that 17 number. I don't know if it keeps climbing right up to 20 and 20 and a half, and then if it gets over that 21, that's where I'm like, man, I like 3 touchdowns. Like I feel like Doran keeps it closer than that. So somehow, right? And
Yeah, right.
we'll if it gets over 21, like NC State's going to score a little bit, I think, right? Like 14, 17. Like, am I confident that Clemson can get up close to 40 points to cover that spread? I mean, that's a ton of points, right? Against a non-App State team. So do you have a final score prediction on this one?
Oh man, I guess I got to go with at least 17. I'll go with 18. I'll go 38-10, I guess. I don't know,
Yeah.
something like that. I do feel like, you know, I feel like that Clemson can definitely keep control of the ball by running with Phil Maffa. So I think, they could keep their defense healthy. But as you mentioned, you know, it is going to be interesting to see how the linebackers and some of those nickels do in that zone coverage. I think that's one place where I feel, from the defensive side of the ball, I feel Clemson is a little bit lazy, or maybe just not not as skilled. Maybe it's not laziness. Maybe it comes off as laziness as to a fan, but maybe it's just the skill is just not there. Because I do feel like a lot of the gash plays from Georgia, where Clemson was in some type of zone and they were giving up. They weren't respecting the players in their area. You know what I mean? They were
Yeah.
kind of getting lost a little bit. They weren't handing off players properly. So they were getting lost in that zone coverage and not respecting their assignment from the linebacker standpoint and from the nickel standpoint. And you get a quarterback who's going to sit in the pocket and be confident, like Carson Beck. They're gonna find that lost player,
That's fine.
and they're
Yeah.
gonna gash you to Bell for like 35 yards. So can CJ Bailey do that? That's the big question. Is, can a freshman do that? We will see, but I think he has a better chance than Grayson McCall does. So I think it'll be, like I said, it's hard not to say take the points with NC State, but I'm going to stick with Clemson minus the 17 for the pick 'em. I'd probably stay away from it at 20 and a half, though.
Yeah. It's getting outrageously high. I hope I mean, I know as a fan, I
Yeah.
hope it's not 20 and a half. I want to enjoy the game. I don't, I don't want to see a blowout. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so if it's 10 and then you guys get a late one to ice it, then that'll work. So Morgan, where can people find you? Where can they follow you, see your show, find your work?
Yeah. So right now, I've kind of taken a little bit of a backseat on YouTube. So I don't have any new videos right now on YouTube, but you can check me out at the Morgan T Show over on X. And so that's where I do my passing charts. That's where I talk during games. And also, if you're in the area, or if you have the app, it's 1055 The Roar, which is the flagship station for Clemson. Every Tuesday night from 7 to 9, I have my radio show. And every Thursday morning from 6 to 9, I am a producer for Mickey Plyler's show. So you can check me out on the radio or on X.
Awesome, man. Well, we appreciate your time. Good luck this weekend. Have fun, and appreciate you taking some time to chat with us tonight, bud.
Yeah, thanks again.